Issues of gentrification, the Barrio Viejo story. Located just across the street from the Tucson Convention Center, and what is today the heart of Tucson, lie the remains of Tucson's oldest barrio. Full of colorful adobe houses, Barrio Viejo, also known as Barrio Libre, because back then it fell outside of the Tucson city limits, was once a thriving community of immigrants, composed of European, Asian, African, and primarily Mexican Americans. These adobe houses are the oldest adobe houses in the nation, with quite a few of them having been built in the late 1800s and early 1900s. The problems for this neighborhood began when Tucson wanted to grow and expand itself, where in the late 1960s and early 1970s, developers began tearing down many of the homes in the northern part of the neighborhood in order to clear way for the soon-to-be Tucson Convention Center, better known as the TCC. When these homes were demolished, over 700 residents were displaced and many historical buildings, relics of early Tucson, disappeared with them. Lidia Otero writes about this in her book titled La Calle, Spatial Conflicts and Urban Renewal in a Southwest City. In it, she expresses a bittersweet sentiment for Tucsonans, or Tucsonenses in Spanish. She states 1971 opening of the TCC symbolized progress for many throughout the city. For many others, however, it symbolized loss, representing the destruction of entire blocks of attached adobe Sonoran-style row houses, many dating back to the 19th century, and of sites where Tucsonenses gathered to celebrate their culture. Indeed, the urban renewal project that gave rise to the TCC profoundly changed not only the physical, but also the social, economic, and cultural character of Tucson's downtown. This is where one must ask themselves if gentrification is worth it. How does one make the decision of which buildings to tear down to make way for new ones? Is the historical factor of a building or an area ever taken into consideration? What about an area's culture and its significance to the region? City planners must walk a fine line in choosing what is necessary to keep the historical purposes and what can be torn down to make way for new construction. It is an absolutely difficult decision, one which must take all factors into consideration, putting the thought process perhaps maybe well over a century ahead, and determining with the help of historical groups if the decision that is being made is the best one for future generations and for the future of an area and its culture. Today there are so many possibilities of what the community that was torn down for the creation of the TCC could have been. Imagine the impact and the significance of having a historical neighborhood in which peoples of all different backgrounds intermingled. It may have well been an example community that could have looked at for what the cultural mix of Tucson once was. After having discussed the history and background of Barrio Libre, or Barrio Viejo as it is known, I'd like to go further into the issue of gentrification because that is the reason why Barrio Viejo currently is in the state that it is in. You may ask yourself, what is gentrification? And according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, gentrification is the process in which a poor area, as of a city, experiences an influx of middle-class or wealthy people who renovate and rebuild homes and businesses, and which often results in an increase in property values and the displacement of earlier, usually poorer residents. Now you may be asking yourself, how bad can gentrification be? Or why is it bad? And the answer to that is that at one point Barrio Viejo was a immigrant community. It was full of European Americans, Asian Americans, African Americans, Mexican Americans, and they lived here because they didn't have very many resources. Hence why most of the homes were built by the residents themselves out of adobe bricks. And for many of the wealthy population, this part of town was an eyesore. And now, because this part of town was an eyesore for the wealthy people, That is why the city developers planned to build a TCC. And so the TCC came to be because they wanted to build a convention center that was at the heart of Tucson, and the wealthy people didn't want their homes knocked down. Hence why the residents of Barrio Viejo were forced to move out and to uh, abandon their homes and community because the wealthy people wanted to use that ground and that area to build the TCC, which, because of that, over 700 people were displaced from their homes and much of the history gone with it as well. And as time went on, the downtown area became an increasingly popular location to live. Its access to work, to restaurants, to premier entertainment made it one of the biggest hotspots in Tucson, Arizona to initiate a thriving community. So, because of this, the downtown area became a hotspot for urban renewal and growth. And it is because of this urban renewal that the old eventually became the new. Soon, a lot of wealthy people moved into the downtown area or were looking to move into the downtown area and began buying up much of the old Barrio Viejo homes. And the style of the homes initially attracted the people as well as the area. So, what these wealthy people did was go and buy up these old houses and renovate them, and thus creating a blend of old and modern, with the old being the outside appearance and the modern being the inside freshly renovated. Looking at present day Barrio Viejo, one can see just how much it's changed. And because of the wealthy people moving into the area, the homes now sell for a range of 400,000 to $1.5 million. Even so much so that Diane Keaton, an actress, was attracted to the Tucson Barrio Viejo area and bought a home for $1.5 million in 2018, and just 2 years later listed it for $2.5 million, thus pushing out the poorer residents and in effect losing the original values and what Barrio Viejo was. Now, having discussed all this in the history of Barrio Viejo, I'd like to get your thoughts on what it is that gentrification has caused in the Tucson Barrio Viejo community, and for the rest of Tucson as well. I'd like you to think about these questions and ask yourself, is the old really worth losing for the new?